joining us on another episode of Always Be Connecting. Today we are talking about place branding, and by that I mean communities, and for it I am wearing my favourite place branding t-shirt. I'll tell you a little bit more about the story behind that later, but I first of all want to introduce a lecturer of place branding, Dr. Giannina Warren, who is currently in the UK. Hello, Giannina.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, wonderful. How are you going?
I'm doing really well, thank you. And thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, me too. I think there's going to be a lot of alignment in what we want, what we believe and what we see, how we see the world. Tell us a little bit about your story, because you're in a bit of a crossroads at the moment yourself. Tell us a little bit of how you got into place branding. Where did that come from, and what's sort of the journey so far, and where are you going next?
Sure. So exciting times, but I'm always someone who believes in personal growth and development. But I started my career 20 years ago in Toronto. I'm from Canada, and I always worked in marketing roles for very large corporations, corporate banks, law firms, and government agencies as well. So very large institutional marketing roles. And then I went on to do a degree in public relations at night school. And then I landed what at the time was my dream job, which was working for the city of Toronto, where I was managing international PR campaigns for major cultural festivals and events.
Amazing.
And this was fantastic because I was able to work with international media and really tell the story about Toronto and really help bring the city to life at a time when the city was really sort of coming into its own. And I absolutely loved the job. But after about 5 or 6 years, I was looking for a new challenge and I always wanted to study abroad. So I left in my mid-30s to go and do a master's degree in the UK. And there I was introduced, I did a master's degree in international communications, and I was introduced to this concept of nation branding. And I just thought, oh, this is fantastic, because this actually brings together all of the things that I know about marketing and promotion and PR, but puts it into this sort of very large governmental place, nation, or even city context. But I was always really struck with this idea that when I had been doing the job, it was really interesting because all the work that I was doing was very behind the scenes. And yet I was really instrumental in actually telling stories about Toronto that actually made it into media and made it into sort of the public realm. And yet there was very little oversight and very little training for me personally to be able to do this job really well. And it always struck me that I thought, wow, I had a lot of influence here, but not necessarily a lot of, a lot of actual training to do the job, well. And it occurred to me that people working in this field probably had very similar situations where they kind of thought they had a love for the place that they were working in.
Yeah.
They had all the marketing and promotional skills, and they were working in a governmental public sector sort of context. But it's very, very challenging. And this is what I call this idea that place marketing and place branding is private sector discipline with public sector accountability. Yeah. And it means that it's quite a challenging job indeed. And so that really launched me into wanting to explore this further. So I went back to Toronto for a year, and then I came back to London and started a PhD and wrote a PhD about the particularities of the place branding profession. And then I was lucky at the time because I was offered a full-time job at Middlesex University to be a lecturer, then a senior lecturer, and then finally worked up to program leader for their Bachelors of Advertising, PR and Branding. And I was leading campuses across London, Dubai, Mauritius, and in Hanoi in Vietnam. And it was a really great run for many, many years. I was 9 years at Middlesex, and my last year there, I actually pivoted from undergraduate studies and actually created the world's first master's degree in place branding. And I was really proud of that because it was the degree that I was looking for 10 years ago. that didn't exist. So we created that degree and launched it. But life always throws you new opportunities and new reasons and ways to advance. And I was approached by a recruiter to move to Vietnam. So basically, I have just announced that I'll be leaving the UK after 13 years of being here, and I'll be moving to Ho Chi Minh City to work for RMIT, Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, who have the largest international campus in Vietnam. And I'll
Yeah.
be an associate professor and senior program manager of their professional communications degree, while I still continue in my place branding research and goals. And
Yeah.
I'm to be also launching the Place Brand Academy in the coming months, which will be a great opportunity for me to take all of the content that I've developed in teaching place branding in London for many, many years and actually put it online and make it much more accessible for people to be able to actually study this stuff directly.
That sounds amazing. That helps with an online course because that, as you said, the world is global and you can go anywhere now. Yes,
Well,
amazing.
exactly. And I've learned a lot in teaching place branding and to both professionals as well as young students. And there is no other pathway for this, actually. There's no university, there's no school anymore that sort of offers this type of training where you're really understanding the role of marketing, but very much in that public sector, community-based, stakeholder-rich environment that we'll talk about. And so there's a specific set of learning skills and even mindset that you need to have to be able to do that job well. And I'm hoping through the Place Brand Academy that we can make those courses accessible for people, especially in places where, they can't travel or they can't afford, a more expensive postgraduate education and can actually do something accessible online at home.
Because reading some of your work, Giannina, I really, as a marketer, I really see how place branding is applicable to all marketing, and I learned many lessons from reading about what you've written. For people who might not be familiar with place branding, can you give some examples through different cities of like what people have done in the past with place branding?
Sure. There's a common misconception that place branding is, we need a new logo and
Make the logo bigger.
exactly, make the logo bigger. And then we're also trying to capture everything this city or this country is in this one little logo. And then we're going to splash it all over everything and then tell everyone we've got a place brand. And that's a low-hanging fruit that I know a lot of agencies and a lot of sort of people who are new to the concept of place branding might think this is where we need to start. And logos have their place, don't get me wrong, but place branding is a much larger, much more complicated and much more holistic endeavor. And it's really about trying to capture the essence of what does this place actually stand for? What does it mean for the people who live there? Or for visitors who might want to come as tourists, or even for students who might want to study, or businesses who might even want to invest. So first of all, it's not destination promotion, which is tourism marketing, right? Tourism marketing is very much about, we have these great offers, come and spend your money, have a good time, and leave, right? And there's definitely a role that place branding has to play in that, because there's a sense of people choosing destinations based on brand, based on the reputation that place holds. And so tourism and the visitor economy is an incredibly important aspect of the market for place branding. And you can't do one without the other. But place branding extends beyond visitors to include the residents, for example, as a major audience and major stakeholder in this, the people who live there. How do they feel about their place? Do they have a sense of pride and belonging in their place? Are they looking to leave at the first opportunity, or are they looking to stay and invest and build their families and their careers and their businesses and actually contribute to the local economy and the local society even?
Yeah.
Another major audience for place branding is the FDI, the foreign direct investment and inward investment and small business community, because do businesses feel like this is a good place for them to invest a headquarters or a branch or a franchise? Do small businesses feel like this is a place where they can come and they can grow a business and actually, again, contribute to the economy? And that has to do with a lot more than just, tax incentives. It has to do with, are there good quality employees here that actually are happy and want to work here? Is there good infrastructure? Is there a sense that, if we were to locate here, that other people around the world would get it? Again, it comes back to reputation.
Yeah.
So place branding really comes down to the level of identity and image and understanding what is our brand identity as it relates to what do we stand for? What are our values? What is our historical context? What does our infrastructure and our experience, the lived experience of being in this place actually feel like to people? And then image is about perception. How are we perceived? And what is that reputation that we have amongst these external audiences that would interact with that place? You bring those two things together and you end up telling a story
Yeah.
about what the place is and what it could be. So it's the mix of being sort of current and relevant, but also aspirational. And much like any product branding, it's very difficult to quantify because it's emotional and it's complicated, and it's absolutely necessary. You will never find a product brand that won't invest in their brand and in their relationship with their different stakeholder audiences. But it's not necessarily something you can pinpoint and say, X leads to Y, or we went from A to Z, and this is exactly what that brand is worth, which is what makes it very challenging to undertake. And that's why a lot of times when places think about doing a place brand strategy, they instantly go to the logo and they instantly go to the marketing campaign, because then they can reflect on, measurable KPIs, and they can reflect on, right, the logo was seen this many times, or the logo was placed on this many types of brand touch points, and this many people engaged with our brand online, so therefore it was successful.
Yeah.
But true place branding goes much deeper. Now, you asked for some examples. I would say some places that have done it really, really, really well are countries like Estonia, that have invested really hard. Really, they went hard early on branding themselves as a digital nation and as a place where digital, where everything is very sort of cutting edge in terms of technology, tech, and digital access. And so that permeates at every level of their government policies, where there's so many things that are happening that are at the cutting edge of digital for the residents who live there, and then the businesses, et cetera, that go.
Sure.
From a more local perspective from your end, I would say look at Tasmania, because they are doing some incredible things down there. They're really engaging with their residents. They're telling new stories about what it means to be in Tasmania, and they're really investing a lot in building a sense of place for Tasmanians that will also then transcend to tourism and business that will want to actually go and invest there.
So it's really interesting that you talk about the marketer in some ways as the conductor, and some ways as the journalist. So like what's the push and pull effect? Like who's in control here?
Oh, that's a great question. One of the things I'm really passionate about is highlighting the really strategic and complex work of marketers in places, because it is, historically, it's been a role that has been quite undermined and quite forgotten about, especially because if you look at sort of a public sector context, you look at local councils, governmental agencies, anything that's sort of governmental or public sector, marketing isn't a natural fit for those industries because they're public services, and marketing has always been seen as something to, sell more tickets, get more bums in seats, just basically hit sort of economic KPIs. And like I said earlier, no company in the world would be without, a chief marketing officer or a head of marketing, or somebody who's really fundamentally invested in understanding the audiences of that product or that company, and bridging the divide between, what that product is and what the audience is looking for, and being able to actually use communicative action campaigns to actually bridge that divide. Whereas in the public sector, that role has often been quite maligned. And in my research over the last 10 years, and I've spoken to hundreds of place marketers around the globe, they consistently tell me that politicians, senior decision makers, people within the policy value chain of their city often say to them, just make it pretty. Can you just do a marketing spin on it? We these are our policies. This is what's going on. Can you just make us a nice brochure, or like just put it on the website?
Who are they trying to impress?
Well, and it's this notion that marketing is sort of this nice add-on, this sort of like nice to have, but it's a bit fluffy, a bit flaky. It's not really that embedded into the processes of what makes the product, which is the place. Whereas again, marketing has progressed so much in the last couple of decades in the private sector, where the marketing man, the head of marketing, the CMO is right there at the table, thinking strategically about how do we make the product so that it fits the needs of the market? How do we actually invest our marketing insights into what audiences are looking for, what the trends are, what the feedback is? How do we invest that in that strategic knowledge much earlier on in the process so that we can make a better product, so that we can sell more of it and actually connect more with our audience? And that's about brand as well, because it really is about connection, right? So in a place branding perspective, again, all of these people kept telling me, they just make it pretty. Just tell me to, whereas I was told this time and time again, if I had been involved in the policy planning processes, if I had been involved earlier with my strategic marketing insight, then I'd be able to help these places make better policy decisions about green space, parks and recreation, cultural festivals and events, wayfinding, the way that the streets are developed and designed, even the types of retail that might come to the high street, about the kinds of businesses that you're actually going out to seek and bring in for inward investment, how you actually go out to the market and market things like tourism or other things, and how do you develop communities? How do you build that sense of pride and belonging in your community? If the marketers had been engaged earlier in the process, they would have had something significant that they could have added to that,
rather than the sort of end brief of someone else has had a conversation. Now make the logo pretty.
Exactly. Now just go tell people about it. And it's like, well, no, now it's too late, right? And this is really where I really sit in this sort of need to highlight the fact that marketers need to be higher up in the policy value chain of cities, especially because they have really deep strategic insights into how those cities can actually look to themselves for the future. And I talk about this sort of boundary spanning role around this notion that, if you've got the marketers who are actually in the middle, they're the ones that are maintaining all of the relationships across the whole ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
They're the ones that actually have access to the media because they work in PR or they work in social. So they have access to the platforms and to the media channels that can amplify the voice, but they also have access to the politicians and the decision makers, right? So they're the ones who are actually understanding and learning about what the direction of the city is going to be, but then translating that for audiences into different platforms. And so they really have this sort of boundary spanning role where they actually, I talk about the fact that social capital, and I've just recently published another paper in marketing theory, actually, which outlines how the social capital of these professionals is their most important occupational resource. Their relationships that they hold in the policy value chain, whether it's with media, politicians, stakeholders, other promotional entities, the international community at large, the marketers are in the center of that, holding it all together with all of the information that they need to be able to actually bridge that divide between the product or the place and the people that need to know about it.
It was a great reading your paper because I've often felt and spoken about being a broker between creatives and business in our sense, and trying to, and because creators have traditionally held less value in the transaction, trying to sort of balance that. So I love what you were saying about marketers are cultural intermediaries. I can't even say. Can you say cultural?
Cultural intermediaries, yeah.
And
Yeah.
with so many more stakeholders, you to get on with the small business owner and have a two-way street. It's not the marketer showing everyone their logo. It's the marketer listening and interacting and finding stories in that kind of journalistic sense, and finding opportunities where movements might be happening and things might be going on that would improve certain elements of the place where they live.
Exactly. And I remember when I was working at the City of Toronto that, part of my job was to meet with we would do these vast cultural events that had, hundreds and hundreds of artists and celebrities. And, we would do these big concerts, and Toronto's really fantastic. It's a really vibrant city for festivals and cultural events. And at that time, it was a real heyday for us. And part of my job would be to sit down and talk to anyone who had anything to do with these events themselves, the behind the scenes, and understand, what was happening, why was it important, why do people need to know about it, what's the hook, what's the thing that people are going to want to know. But I had to corral all of this vast amount of information incoming. But then I had to figure out, well, what are going to be the things that are going to stick with the media? How can I tell the story on social? How can I pitch this to an international art magazine or
Yeah.
a news outlet, right? In a way
Why would they care?
Why would they care, right? It's the
Yeah.
so what factor. And that's what's so fascinating about PR, really, is that you really have to understand, why do people care about this? And you have to figure out a way to penetrate, because you can't pay for it. You have to earn that coverage. But at the same time, again, what really struck me was that it was me making those decisions. That was the filtering system, the interpretation of all of this data, and then making that data accessible for larger audiences in a way that was going to be a good soundbite, was up to me alone to decide.
Yeah.
Which is a really powerful position to be in. And this is where I discovered this concept of cultural intermediaries. Now, I can't take credit for the term. It was actually created by a French sociologist named Pierre Bourdieu.
Yeah.
In the 1980s. There's his book actually right there. It's called Distinction.
Yeah.
And he was really interested in power dynamics. He was, as I said, he was a sociologist, and he was really interested in, how do some people have different levels of power in society than others, when they don't necessarily have status. So we know that politicians or major celebrities or CEOs of companies, we know that they have power because of the position that they hold, the status that they have. But he was really interested in this whole subset of professionals who had a lot of influence over how society was developed and built, but weren't necessarily overtly you didn't necessarily think of them or see them out the way that you would, the leaders that we understand. And he talked about, for example, advertising professionals and people working in fashion and design and a lot of these creative industries as having a lot more power, not economic power, but social power and cultural power,
yes,
to decide how the world actually starts to develop and evolve. And that gave way academically to a lot of thinkers talking about how, well, who are these cultural intermediaries? If we can't see them and we don't really know who they are, how do we know where they are, and where do they operate, and how do they operate? And then that was really fascinating to me because there had been a lot of academic work that talked about personal trainers as cultural intermediaries, or graphic designers and people sort of working more in those creative fields. And I thought, well, in place branding, this is actually exactly what they are. Because again, as I said earlier, these are people that are working very much behind the scenes. They're trying to embed a private sector mentality around marketing and communications and audience engagement and brand into public sector sort of environment where the KPIs are very different. It's not about how many tickets you sell or how many bums in seats that you get. It's about a feeling. It's about that sense of belonging, that sense of connection that people get with their place. And so my PhD and hopefully my book that will come out eventually when I have time to finish writing it, talks about how actually there's a framework that we can use to understand this work, which is the cultural intermediary framework, which talks about forms of capital.
Yeah.
So the social capital, which I mentioned earlier, for example, the relationships that they hold are really, really important. And they build credibility for their jobs, for their roles through these relationships that they build. And then what's even more important and maybe even more exciting is cultural capital, because cultural capital is knowledge, right? It's about what do you know? How do you exhibit your knowledge? How do you build credibility for your knowledge if you can't, if people don't automatically know who you are or what you have? And so what a lot of marketers will do is that they'll put their degrees on the wall, or they'll put artifacts of their work on the walls to show people, like, listen, I know what I'm talking about, right? Personal branding and self-branding and being available on LinkedIn, et cetera, is a form of showing cultural capital.
Yeah.
And what my research pointed to was the fact that in place branding, the social and cultural capital are so intertwined for these marketers, because what they do is they use their relationships, they bring in all of this information, and they convert that into knowledge. And then they go out and they make a big show of trying to address the KPIs, the measurement, the ways of telling people, listen, this work really matters. And at the same time, what's really significant about these people working as cultural intermediaries is I identify the fact that they actually have a great deal of impact and influence. And I talk about how they have a lot of influence upstream, where they're influencing policymakers, decision makers, politicians with strategic insights about what the market is looking for, but they're having a massive impact downstream on media discourse and social and the way that people talk and understand and see the place. So as much as they're invisible, working behind the scenes,
Yeah.
working on their social capital, working on their cultural capital, in fact, they actually have a great deal of power over how that place actually starts to come to be recognized and known. And this was a new sort of way of extending Bourdieu's theory to say that this role is very important indeed, and that's why we need to understand it better and also place it higher up in the policy value chain of cities.
I think that's really interesting because it kind of falls back to a theory that everybody is worthy and valuable, and especially in a place. Everyone has a role, everyone can contribute, everybody has something. So whereas one person has one type of capital and another person has another type of capital, we got to learn how to share. So maybe that's
really interesting, because I talk about the fact that at the end of the day, we live in a promotional culture, and this might seem distasteful to some because it's a sort of it's sort of a capitalist structure of thinking of everything as a market and thinking everything as a product, including ourselves as people.
Yeah.
The reality is that this is the world that we live in. It's a media saturated environment where how you represent yourself, whether that's online, in person, on LinkedIn, on your socials, on wherever, really becomes truth. That's what people accept, and people want to believe what they see, and we're so inundated with messages all the time that if you do want to stand out in any way. You do have to sort of think like a marketer, and that's why there's the the influencer era and
Yeah.
the self branding and all of those types of things. So I think that the capital framework, the social capital, the cultural capital framework, the symbolic capital framework, which is basically when you bring those two things together, and then you end up having someone who has symbolic power. So they don't necessarily have a lot of money or prestige, but people pay attention to them because what they're saying resonates.
Yeah.
And that could be the smallest audience in the world, as long as it's in your pocket of the world and it's your universe and people pay attention to you, you have symbolic power, symbolic capital. And I think it's a really interesting way for us to think about not only how places represent themselves, but how we represent ourselves in the world. And the reality is that it might be distasteful, but it's necessary. So if there's a way that you can do it that feels authentic and feels meaningful to you, nobody gets hurt
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
process.
yeah. Yeah, that's interesting.
But it is necessary.
It's everybody sort of loses their way in the fight to be relevant. They do lose that authenticity. So another thing I wanted to talk, I don't know if we talked about this before or during. Another thing I wanted to talk about was the difference between smaller, more agile places and bigger places that have got more infrastructure that's in place, and how it might be harder or easier. They've got more resources, but maybe sort of the smaller places have got more agility. Because that's what happens is in business. Is that true for places, or is it just far more complex, I imagine?
Well, for me, the really exciting developments that can occur in place branding are at that small town, small city level, community level, because that's where you can really make a difference. And it doesn't have to be, a high cost, high value type of endeavor. It can be quite grassroots. Now, places like New York, London, Paris, Tokyo, I mean, they don't, of course they have massive teams that are set up not only on the tourism destination promotion side, but obviously on the economic development and FDI side, and probably within the local government and et cetera, et cetera. They will have a hierarchy of people working in this field whose job is to promote the brand of Tokyo, London, New York, et cetera.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely extremely complex, extremely expensive, extremely multi-layered and multifaceted. That's a function of the size of the place, and that's what it needs. And you do have then in those cases a very, very complex stakeholder environment that is international and national and local. And those places have highly trained professionals who are doing great work. But I think the real power and the real excitement is for the smaller places, the towns of 20,000 people, even a town of, 1,000 people that has sort of been there forever. And how do you actually create a sense of pride and belonging in that place? How do you tell a story about what it means to actually be there? And yes, it's still complex because you've got a multi-layered stakeholder environment. So you've got the residents, you've got the largest stakeholders. So, for example, if you do have a university, or if you've got any sort of manufacturing or larger businesses that are anchored in that place, or if you've got community groups that play a large role, for example. And not every place is a tourism destination, right? So you can't use that as a, well, we need to, and a lot of places will start with that of like, we need to have a museum, or we need to have an attraction or something to lure the tourists here to spend money. That's not always going to be possible. So sometimes you've just got to work with what you've got. And sometimes it's really just about giving the young people a reason to stay, right?
Yeah,
and we're seeing that in Europe a lot. For example, a lot of small towns across Europe are really struggling because their young people are leaving in droves. They're not finding opportunities. They don't see a reason to build their life, or there's no jobs, etc. And so you have a lot of small places in Italy, for example. I don't know if you've seen, a lot of them are offering, buy an old house for €1, or, you can buy, a little villa on a mountainside for, £100 or €100. And then, but the expectation is that you will then build and renovate and invest and live in the community. And lots of smaller communities are starting to wake up to the fact that they need to actually get on this, and they need to start talking to their stakeholders and understand, why do you like living here? What
Yeah.
does it mean to be here? What stands out for you? What is it what's in the fabric of our society that makes this a good place to live, work, and play? And then how can we tell that story to the world? And because of digital media, there are many, many really low cost or cost effective ways of being able to do that, digitally, through storytelling, through videos, through social media campaigns, through community initiatives, even. And I think that every place in the world eventually is going to wake up to the fact that they need some sort of brand and they need to start thinking of themselves a
Yeah.
little bit more promotionally, so that they can reach the audiences, so that they can sustain. This is literally how do we sustain ourselves? And it's really fascinating to me, because there are cities, major cities around the world. I was talking to some people in Finland and in the Nordics, for example. Cities like Helsinki are looking at the next 10 years and realizing that they don't have enough people to sustain their economy.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so talent attraction is a major, major component of what place branding has become, because the world is global. Young people can travel, people can work from anywhere, especially post pandemic. That whole structure has changed. And so cities big and small are waking up to the fact that if we need workers, we need people who are going to come and be able to actually sustain our economy. So we need to be an attractive place to live. This is not about a tourism proposition. This is about lifestyle. Do we offer the things that young people, Gen Z, are looking for when they're
Yeah.
actually looking for a place to settle down and raise their families?
Uh,
And so that can happen at the large city level, or it can happen at the small community level. But either way, attention is going to need to be paid.
it's interesting that you talk about affordability and convenience and all those things that the community can provide in small businesses and policies and things like that. But for me, a place is that attracts me is culture, and just I don't know why, but I think of Amy Winehouse as a good example of somebody who kind of single-handedly created a movement and a change and something very, very different like in the UK, we were all listening to Spice Girls and S Club 7 and things like that. And then Amy came along and sounded like nobody else. And, and now people want to go to Camden in London and see where all that movement happened. And one of my favorite things to ask my friends is, like, if you could be in any movement in the world, where would you want to go? Would you want to go to 80s New York, or New Orleans in the 50s, or like whereabouts would you want to go? Does a movement happen organically? Can it be produced and manufactured, or is it because Amy Winehouse, it was done in oppression, it was done in spite of not having opportunities. So like how do these sort of things occur?
Great question. I mean, most often cultural revolution and cultural change does happen from that place of lack, or that place of pressure, or there's something in the water maybe that helps things sort of percolate from the bottom. And actually, this part to me is really fascinating when it comes to place branding, because you can't manufacture culture. If culture is something that comes from the people, it comes from at the community level, it starts to bubble up. And I think especially now, because of the digital era that we're living in, people don't have a lot of patience for inauthenticity. They want something that feels true and authentic to that place. And nobody wants to sort of go to a place that is just a cookie cutter version of every other place. And a lot of places are making that mistake where they're saying, well, they call it the Disneyfication, right? So
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
everywhere, right? Or, you have all the same chain stores and the same experience. And as people are saying, well, I didn't come here to this place to experience what I have back home. I wanted something different. And actually, I wrote another paper, and I work with Dr. Keith Dinney, who was my PhD supervisor. He wrote a book called Nation Branding. And we introduced this concept of what we call the icon model of place branding. And icon stands for I, which is integrated, which is about making sure that you're integrating with the different stakeholder groups. C is contextualized, which means that you're making sure that the messages that you're sending are actually matching the needs of the audiences that you're targeting.
Yeah.
O stands for organic. And the organic is really about understanding and putting your finger on the pulse of understanding what is really happening at that grassroots level, and looking around and trying to unpack and trying to sort of coax out that cultural change or something that's happening that is unique to that place. So it's not about manufacturing it, but it's about nurturing it.
I
It's
love
about
that.
identifying it, nurturing it, and then amplifying that for the audiences. And then the N stands for new, which is again keeping your eye on, where are we going in the future, so that organic and new are two things that really start to kind of work together, where it's the marketer's role to be the eyes and ears, to understand that, hey, there's this, I was talking in certain places. I remember doing a project in Thessaloniki in Greece, and there was an athlete there who was a parkour champion, and he came up sort of through the streets of Thessaloniki, became an international parkour champion, but that gave the city something to sort of hang on to, of like, hey, this guy he's representing us internationally. He's doing interesting work. Parkour is a new sport. It's really innovative. But here's a way that we can tell the story of the city and its interesting architecture, and the way that you can kind of roam the streets by using this athlete as an ambassador to show how he developed his parkour in the streets of Thessaloniki. And then, and so that became a story about growth, about youth, about activity and sport.
And it's a symbiotic relationship as well, because everyone benefits from it.
Exactly. So it's really it's not about trying to create something inauthentic or saying we need culture, let's just import, or create. It's about really trying to understand what's actually happening and in your community. And the only way you can do that is by talking to the people that actually live there and involving them in that process. And then by then you can actually start to, whether it's in financial investment or even just exposure investment, in terms of nurturing and kind of coaxing along that culture, and then helping that kind of rise to the surface and become the story that resonates, that matches sort of the brand values that you're trying to promote.
Yeah, this is fascinating. Lastly, I'm going to tell the story of my shirt. I think I told you in my email when I introduced myself. So when I was growing up in the 90s in the south of the UK, it wasn't a very friendly place. We were quite rude about people for what we thought was hilarious, but not so nice for other people. And there was a place called Rowner, and we joked about it, there was lots of bin fires and there was lots of crime and all these sorts of things. And it wasn't until the 2000s when I started reading about what had happened to Rowner and how mismanagement of the place had led to people leaving, and it starting to have a low economic residents, because it was nobody wanted to live there, so they had to bring the prices right down. I think they actually sued the residents at one point. And then in just before the pandemic, a friend of mine went in to try and build a bit of community in there with some other people. So they, it is a logo, but so they kind of branded Rauner, and it has such a such a complete story for me, because it's got the nostalgia of us being like rubbish teenagers to to try and be funny, and then this kind of like, oh wait a minute, there's good people and there's bad people in the world, and then the community actually sort of like stepping in and flipping the fate around and really trying to do something different. So a reminder that it's in everybody's hands to build the story of the place and what it could be.
That's a fantastic point, and really, really important to bring home as well, which is that not all the time is the government going to get it, or even be on top of it, or even understand the need for it. Governments are slow, they're bureaucratic, especially in the UK, local governments have zero resource for this kind of thing. It's a really difficult time here in the UK for that kind of thing.
Yeah, 100%.
And so, and around the world, right? This type of thing, it does take money, it does take funding, it does take vision and strategy, and it does take professionals to do it. In the absence of that, communities and organizations and volunteers need to step in, and because there's a greater purpose to this. Again, it's not about economic development necessarily, as it is about community building. And brand is something that is actually really powerful, because what it can act as is a unifying force, right? Brand becomes an umbrella, it becomes a story, it becomes an understanding, it becomes something that people can believe in and rally behind, and then get together, and it gives them a reason to work together. And so this is why I'm so passionate about sharing the story. It's sharing, what is place branding and why does it matter, is because at the end of the day, this is the world we live in. People understand the world through meaning, through symbols, through communication, through video, through stories, right? People understand the world through stories. And so if you can use brand as a way to build stories about what your place is and what it can be, and use that as a unifying force to get your different stakeholders at the table working together to tell that a similar, common, or unified story about that place. And then that ends up eventually meaning that the people that live there feel more pride to be there, that they take more pride in their gardens, and that they don't litter in the streets, that they invest in businesses, that they
have more opportunities.
Exactly. That they go to the park on the weekends and add a sense of vibrancy, they put together a small community festival, to, closing down the street and having a pedestrian zone for a Sunday a month. A farmer's market, something that brings a sense of community and belonging to the place under this banner of what the brand is and can be. Then it can actually be a really, really powerful tool for communities to really build themselves a sustainable future.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And I've learned so much from this. I'm so thankful for you talking to me and to our listeners. When is your online course coming out, and how can we get on a wait list or connect with you to find out more about that?
Great. Yeah. As we said at the beginning, this happens to be the transition zone where I will be launching the business in a couple of months, probably within, by the end of 2024, we'll be online. We're at placebrandacademy.com. Again, it's going to be a place where people can sign up for courses, and have access to master classes, and eventually also build a sense of community, because of my ultimate vision and goal is to help people who are doing this work in small communities and small towns around the world to actually link with each other so that they can share best practice. And so, yeah, placebrandacademy.com is the best place to find us. I'm also on LinkedIn, and I'm quite easily found, I think, by Giannina Warren. Not many people have my name. So, but I'd love it if people got in touch and let me know if they'd be interested in the courses, and we will be developing a wait list for it as well. We're very close to launch, actually. So, yeah, watch this space.
How
and
exciting.
I'm really looking forward to being more on your side of the world.
Yes.
And I'll be in Melbourne quite often, I think, at my new job at RMIT. And I'll be also working a lot in waving the place branding banner in Southeast Asia and Australia region as well.
Yeah, sure. So you're a Canadian in the UK, off to Vietnam to work with the Australians.
Yeah, exactly. It is a global world.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Giannina, and speak to you again soon.
I really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much for giving me a chance to have a great chat with you this morning.